Let's go.
Strong signal. Station.
We're rolling. We're gonna go in 7, 6, 5, 4, and 10.
Bringing you on the front line and beyond the headlines.
Outside the wire.
Outside the Wire.
Many of us have heard the story of Jamil Shaw, the promising young Los Angeles high school football star, shot to death by an illegal alien gangbanger. We know that his mother, Army Sergeant Anita Shaw, got the news while serving her country in Iraq. We know that the punk who killed her son was at one point in custody, but was released without having his immigration status scrutinized. The guy who killed my son was in custody. He had a long prison record, and he was let out without any kind of hearing. He was let out into the community on a Saturday night with no supervision, and within 24 hours, he had gotten another gun. The incident has aroused the passion surrounding the city's long-standing directive, Special Order 40, which prohibits the LAPD from asking arrestees about their immigration status. Immigrants' rights advocates are busy screaming their traditional charges of xenophobia and racism, while anti-illegal immigration activists seize on another example of an alien who killed again. I wonder if the Los Angeles City Council would be so seemingly lenient on illegals if, say, Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa's son or daughter was the teenager shot dead in the street. In fact, we've seen examples where accepted bad things happen, as Barack Obama puts it, to ordinary people. But when they happen to our elected royalty, it's an emergency of monumental importance. Now, while I don't wish ill upon anyone except terrorists, can we admit that we'd live in a totally different America if our insulated politicians were subject to the day-to-day hassles and tragedies we all were? For example, we know that 100% of the children of the Congressional Black Caucus attend private schools. Can you imagine the reforms that would happen in public education if they sent their kids to the same inner-city public schools that their constituents' children are trapped in? Somehow the caucus's public school advocacy chant of "mend it, don't end it" wouldn't wash if their kids came home functionally illiterate and frightened to return due to threats of being shot or stabbed. I'd be willing to bet that politicians would be more hands-on in their districts, and more would be done to make the economic environments much more vibrant if their families were dependent on that economy for their survival. There are economically depressed areas in the black community that have been so for decades, and it appears their elected representatives seemingly don't care. As long as they can point to poverty and redlining and neglect to get them reelected, the dire plight of their citizens is a necessary inconvenience. Politicians' expenses are fairly well covered. Can you imagine how much different our energy policies would be if they had to pay for their own gasoline for their own car? Bet you the gasoline tax would have been reduced, if not repealed, long ago. Sex offenders roam our neighborhoods like wolves among sheep, ready to pounce at any moment. What do you think would be the legislative sentiment on sexual predators if a congressman's daughter was raped and murdered by an offender with a long rap sheet? Do you think we'd be talking about preserving the rights of a pervert who did his time and should have his freedom of movement and privacy observed? If a senator's son were raped by a pedophile, our laws would most surely be different than that which we have today. Not to sound like an anti-war activist, but can you imagine the reluctance some of our politicians would be to knee-jerk military action if they and their wives and kids were subject to an appearance on the front line shortly after the beginning of hostilities? I contend there would be more emphasis on strategy than on posturing and chest thumping. We would go in, kick ass, and get out. No long, drawn-out conflicts or opposition declarations of our losing. We would fight to win, and quickly. If politicians were subject to the same financial limitations we are, tax policies would be much different than they are. As of now, they can grant themselves pay raises. Try that at your job. Thus, paying higher taxes aren't that big a deal, as they can still pay their mortgages, utilities, clothes, car payments, and expenses with cash in pocket to spare. If the wasteful spending practices resulted in tax increases that took food out of the mouths of their family members, fiscal responsibility would be more than a bumper sticker slogan. If lawsuits run amok, damage their employer's business, and their family members were laid off, we may have seen tort reform long ago. If elected representatives had to pay for health care like the rest of us, malpractice insurance, which is a cost passed down to the consumers, would be unnecessary, as frivolous lawsuits would be a thing of the past. If they had to live in the same neighborhoods as their constituents, complete with gang violence, police would be empowered to fight the plague. Imagine congressmen and senators standing on the steps of the Capitol and gang members driving by, strafing the crowd, shooting at a rival. There would probably be an entirely different attitude about gang violence instead of this tolerance because this happens in someone else's neighborhood. America would be an entirely different place if the bad things that happen to us on a daily basis happen to those we elect. Until they do, we're stuck with the America they've created and maintain. Unfortunately, until the Los Angeles City Council or Mayor Villaraigosa's children are victims of violent gang crime, it will not be taken seriously as the problem it is. City residents will continue to live behind the bars in their windows, and more Jamil Shaws will die needlessly. We are the America we elect. There are times when it doesn't matter what something was said. The words tend to have the same impact no matter who says them. With that, do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, the young lady over there.
Recent polls have shown a fifth of Americans can't locate the U.S. on a world map. Why do you think this is?
I personally believe that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps. And I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere, like such as, and I believe that our education over here in the U.S. should help the U.S. Or should help South Africa and should help the Iraq and the Asian countries. So we will be able to build up our future for the children.
Thank you.